Hey everybody, Fred Minnick here, and I have a question to pose to you. Would you drink whiskey that's been sitting at the bottom of Lake Michigan for 170 years? That's exactly the question that whiskey geeks around the world are asking themselves as the Westmoreland has been discovered, or at least the findings of its discovery has been. So, this is a ship that sunk in 1854 prior to the Civil War, and it was carrying $20 million worth of gold, crewmen, 17 crewmen, all thought to be dead, and a lot of barrels of whiskey. Now, before I go any further and talk about like the survival rate of this whiskey, I first want to mention this hat. This hat is actually, I'm wearing this hat. It says Dick Hare is a friend of mine. Dick Hare was a man that passed away a week and a half ago. He was the father to a friend of mine, Daniel Hare, who owns the CR Citrus Company. That you always see me wearing the hats, like positive vibes. This was his father, so I'm wearing this hat as some support to my friend Daniel. And I wish I met Mr. Dick Hare, but anybody who raised a son like Daniel was definitely would have been a friend of mine. So I'm wearing this hat for him. So back to the ship. It was hauling a lot of gold. It was hauling whiskey. So this is something that people would have been looking forward to receiving, and it sinks. It sinks in the middle of a storm. Now, divers found this in 2010. I wish I knew about this discovery. Now, a famous shipwreck hunter found it, but now the question is, could the whiskey survive? Would you drink it? Seriously, put in the comment section, would you drink whiskey that had been in a lake that long? I don't know if I would, to be honest with you. But the question that we have to answer first is, would it survive? First, we'd have to see how the barrels, how they're positioned. From the one barrel capture that I have seen in a video, it does not look like these barrels would have been in the best condition. And remember too, like there are a couple positive factors going for the survival of a whiskey barrel in this ship. One is that you had coopers using wood that was probably about 100 years old. They would not have been using young wood like they do today. So there would not have been anything less than 80 years old used to make a barrel. So that is a major positive as I see it, because the older the wood, the tighter the grain, the less porous it would be. Another positive is that this seems to be a smaller barrel, and it was in fact common to transport whiskey in smaller barrels. Now, I don't have anything to compare that size to it, so I may be wrong, but the size of the barrel that I have seen in the video and the photo does not look like it is large. So there's less surface area for it to be damaged. But we do see a little chip in the kind of like the front of the head there, but it doesn't look like it would have went all the way through. So the barrel, for the most part, looks largely intact. Now, there were other barrels on board. If others are at least in halfway good a condition as this, then the chances are whiskey may have survived. Now, I would still say, you have to question whether or not you would drink it, because during the 1850s, this was not exactly, this was whiskey that was made prior to federal mandates like we have today. So the whiskey would be it could have kerosene in it, sulfuric acid. It could have some additives in there that you just that rectifiers would have used to give it a little kick, and they wouldn't have known better. So there could have been a lot of things put in that whiskey that you would not actually want to drink. So hopefully that when it comes out, they test it to make sure that it is indeed it is indeed legit whiskey. But I hope that if there is any survivable trace, that they contact the folks at Firm Solutions, Shane Baker, and Dr. Pat Heist, and they run some tests on it. Because I would like to know what kind of corn was being used, what was the yeast like. I'd really like to get into the details of what this whiskey was made of, what kind of still was used, and also would love to know the species of the wood. At this point, the world, the cooperage world, had yet to really, make the full decision of what kind of wood they would use. Today, it's typically American white oak, Quercus alba. Well, that's not the law. That's what is mostly used. Oak is the law, not the type of oak. But back then, there wasn't a lot, but there was still just enough of red oak being used. But red oak is very porous. It wouldn't hold the whiskey. It would leak out. So you're looking at a kind of a time capsule for us whiskey lovers, us whiskey historians. And I really do think this is one of the greatest discoveries of whiskey history. Now, another thing to point out is that we do have some success of bottles surviving shipwreck. There have been bottles survive. There have been champagne bottles survive. There have been whiskey bottles survive shipwrecks. So there is precedent of spirits or wine surviving in water for long periods of time. Who that's assessing this is saying that it's going to take them about 10 years to fully extrapolate things, fully get an account of it. But they're calling it a straight up museum, like a shipwreck museum. So I find that fascinating. I find that absolutely fascinating. And I would say this is equivalent of like finding a mead hall in what is now like Denmark or Germany or something like that. So every now and then you hear about these archaeologists finding a restaurant. It just happened recently in Iraq, I believe. And you just like think about yourself in that like restaurant or dining hall drinking mead or whiskey or rum. I definitely would not have wanted to have been on this ship though. And just the other day we were in Milwaukee and I was looking at that water. I've been on Lake Michigan. I've been on Lake Michigan. Those are choppy waters. I'd even say they're choppier than like some of the coastal waters in a storm. I've been on those waters in a storm, and it does not feel good. And there's sometimes when you're out there by yourself in Lake Michigan, it can be a little freaky. But I'm not a boater. Like professional boaters and people experienced with boating have no issue with that. Whereas I'm like, I don't like the water. I want to get off. So, but at any rate, would you drink this whiskey if it is bottled? By the way, if they bottle it, who's going to be going for that whiskey, right? I mean, my money's on Trey Zoller from Jefferson's. He's probably want to put that in a rocket and fly it to the moon. Like, well, not only has it been shipwrecked, but it's been flown to the moon. And that's the next Jefferson voyage from Lake Michigan to the moon. Now, I just made that up, but it sounds good. But that's going to do it here. And thanks for listening to me about Dick Hare. Daniel, I'm very sorry for your loss and your family's loss. But I wish I knew him. I am putting his Dick Hare's obituary link in my description. Also, I'm putting links to the stories about this shipwreck in the description as well. But thank you all for tuning in. Be safe out there. Remember, vodka sucks unless it's being used for hand sanitizer. Cheers.